Welcome to Countdown to Classic, a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday and Wednesday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I am your host, Josh Corbett, and I'm an avid fan of the vanilla days of World of Warcraft and a podcast veteran, so I figured, why not combine my two passions and bring you this show? However, please remember that as much as I love and adore this game, I am not the go-to authority on all things World of Warcraft. But guess who is? You, the listeners and fans, and that's why this podcast is about you and what you're talking about throughout the week online, as much as it is about this amazing game that we've all come to know and love. I'm just a fanboy of WoW and a mouthpiece for the news and conversations that we're all taking part in. I try to stay as neutral as possible and present both sides of all the discussions presented in the show. But just before we get to the good stuff, please do bear with me for a bit of housekeeping. I want to let you know that you can find all things Countdown to Classic online at countdowntoclassic.com. More importantly, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from, and like, follow, or subscribe to the show on social media. You can find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Countdown to Classic, on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2, and on the show's YouTube channel at Countdown to Classic. One small favor I would ask is that if you're currently listening to the show on YouTube and you're liking what you're hearing, then please do click the download or stream links on the website as well, as I primarily lean on those figures as a look into how the show is growing. Now, as Countdown to Classic is a show about you, the players, this is an interactive experience, and I absolutely want to hear your feedback or input on the show. You can drop me a line on all socials or email feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. As this is a Wednesday episode, we'll be going through the segments that you come to know and hopefully love from last way back Wednesday, when we went through a scoop of vanilla, That's What We Said, anger management, tidbits, and top 5. Please be sure to stick around for all the segments as we have a bit of creative fun towards the end of these Way Back Wednesday episodes. And just a reminder that this is mostly a collation of information that is available from WoW Wiki. If I've gotten something wrong, I do apologize, but please let me know if you think you have a correction. So now, it's about time I shut up and get to it with a scoop of vanilla. The Deadmines are expansive, winding tunnels dug out under Westfall and part of northern Stranglethorn. There is even a secret tunnel into Stormwind. It is the lowest level Alliance instance and is populated by members of the Defias Brotherhood. Its entrance can be accessed in the town of Moonbrook in southwestern Westfall, while its exit is located in the western part of the Dagger Hills near the ocean. The Deadmines are the center of the Defias operation, led by the ambitious Edwin Van Cleef, who was constructing a juggernaut at the bottom of the mines with the aid of the goblins. His plans were stopped by the Alliance militia, and Edwin himself was killed and beheaded. But before we get to VC and his story, let's jump back a step and find out more about this actual location and its history. In order to completely understand why we were visiting the Deadmines, one must go way back, which is appropriate for Way Back Wednesdays, to the First War, the events of which were played through by players of the original Warcraft RTS game in 1994, and we even go back a little bit before that. The First War was a conflict fought between the Orcs and humans, following the Orcish clans of Draenor's arrival on Azeroth. Just prior to this First War, the humans thrived militarily, culturally, and economically, with the Deadmines acting as the greatest gold production center in the human lands, being a major boon to the kingdom's resources and bottom line. It is said the Deadmines' gold deposits once accounted for a third of Stormwind's treasure reserves, thus making it something that Stormwind had a very distinct fucking interest in protecting. Kind of like what Marvel Studios is to Disney these days. However, During the First War, the Deadmines were abandoned. Around that time, Lord Anduin Lothar, last true descendant of the ancient Arathi bloodline, Knight Champion of Azeroth during the First War, and the supreme commander of the armies of the Alliance of Lordaeron during the Second War, titles, ventured into the perilous Deadmines, leading an expedition to obtain the lost Tome of Divinity. The expedition was not heard from again, as they were totally screening everyone's phone calls. Unfortunately for him, Lord Lothar was captured by a band of ogres and held captive for 20 months, which is not dissimilar to the experience that Katie Holmes had during her marriage to Tom Cruise. Ha! I've come for you again, Cruise. That's 2 in 2 weeks. Take that. Why am I going after Cruise? He knows what he did. Eventually, the Great Knight appeared in a vision to the Abbot of Northshire, the home of the human religious order of clerics known as the Brotherhood of Northshire, located in Northshire Valley, in the foothills of Elwyn Forest of the Kingdom of Stormwind. In this vision, a battered Lord Lothar pled for assistance, telling the abbot that his clothes totally stunk and he doesn't know how much longer he can handle literally shitting where he eats. King Lane, the ruler of the Kingdom of Azeroth during the First War, and father to Varian and grandfather to Anduin Wrynn, ordered you, yes you, to lead a detachment of warriors and healers into the mines in an attempt to find Sir Lothar, heal him, and bring him and any other survivors back alive, and preferably to have them bathed before bringing them back into the city. So, did you do it? Well, I didn't. I thought you said you were going to do it. No, the wheel on the fridge clearly says that on Sundays I take out the garbage and you rescue fictional lords of Azeroth. Jeez, I fucking can't wait for this lease to expire. In the end, Lothar was ultimately rescued by us. Still waiting for that thank you note, by the way, which I'm not going to get because he's dead. Sorry, spoiler alert. Anyway, sorry if that's a bit insensitive. Interestingly, on the other side of the coin, the Orcs also had an interest in the Deadmines, as the war chief of the Horde during the First War, Blackhand, discovered that his daughter, Griselda, had absconded to the location, fleeing there with the ogre Turok, before interracial relationships were cool. Totally not related to the dinosaur hunter. Together, they plotted in defiance and engaged in an affair that Blackhand deemed treason, and thus he naturally ordered that his daughter's head be swiftly removed from her shoulders. That's your daughter, man. Jesus. Thus, both were slain by an Orcish raid. That was us, again. In the worst rendition of Romeo and Juliet of all time, the Rotten Orcs website only gave it 1 zug instead of the traditional 2 zugs, thus deeming it rotten. This act essentially cleansed the Deadmines of the ogres and slimes that had overrun the location once Turok moved in. Thus the mines simply remained as they were for the purpose of, well, mining. Fancy that. Allegedly, there was eventually a deadly cave-in which cost many lives and forced the mines to close down. Meanwhile, in a galaxy very, very close by, being Stormwind, which was just down the road, there lived a boy by the name of Edwin Van Cleef. A young Van Cleef, who came from a prominent family of Stormwind Masons, came to befriend a man by the name of Matthias Shaw, the head of the organization known as SI7, the agency of intelligence for the city of Stormwind, and in fact much of the Alliance. By the way, MI6 is still waiting for their homage money on this one, Blizzard. Matthias took such a liking to Edwin that he personally trained him as a rogue in SI7 for up to 10 years, teaching Edwin the skills of roof walking, a specialty in defeating mechanical defenses, and throat cutting, a specialty in defeating throat-based defenses. Anyway, it's heavy work for a lad. I can just imagine come on, Edwin, let's go cut your very first throat today. Hooray! Also, roof walking is totally not to be confused with roof stalking, which was Santa Claus's main skill. Oh, and P.S., by the way, don't try to tell me that Santa isn't real because, we both know. Come on. At the end of the First War, the Horde laid waste to Stormwind, and Lord Anduin Lothar, having now finally bathed after his time in the Deadmines, was forced to make a decision and led the people of Stormwind out of the city along with young Prince Varian Ryn, son of now former King Lane Ryn, who was assassinated at the final battle of the First War by Garona Halfosen, an emissary of the Horde during this first invasion of Azeroth. Following this near annihilation, the people of Stormwind retreated to the Kingdom of Lordaeron, the northernmost subcontinent of the Eastern Kingdoms, to recoup and grieve, and the once mighty city of Stormwind lay in pieces. The Second War, being the events depicted in RTS game Warcraft 2 from 1995, saw King Terenas Menethil, the King of Lordaeron, form a united front with the creation of the Alliance of Lordaeron, which saw the human race, together with their allies the dwarves, gnomes, and high elves, band together and managed to crush the old Horde. With the defeat of the Horde in the Second War, the Alliance reclaimed the city of Stormwind. King Terenas encouraged the Alliance of Lordaeron to fund the rebuilding of Stormwind, and Varian Ryn, no longer a little squirt, triumphantly returned with his people to the gates of Stormwind, only to discover that it was now a total shithole, or as Lionel Hutz would describe it, rustic, having been almost completely destroyed. Varian, however, encouraged his people to rebuild what they had lost and flourish in the kingdom that his father had once lovingly ruled over. Thus, with the announcement to rebuild, Varian had to find people willing to take part in said rebuilding, which was going to be no small feat. An organisation known as the Stonemasons Guild, not to be confused with the Stone Cutters, who were busy making Steve Gutenberg a star. The Stonemasons Guild was a guild of artisans and builders, similar to the Dwarven Royal Stonecutters Union, and they were contracted for this job as they had just come off a successful bit of construction with Netherguard Keep, a Dallaranian fortress of dour mages and paladins, built on a high bluff along the only road into the Blasted Lands in order to keep watch over the Dark Portal, one of the two gateway portals that teleport between Azeroth and Draenor, or Outland, homeworld of the Orcs and Draenei. But guess who the guild elected leader of the Stonemasons was? It was our boy Edwin, and that little boy grew up to be a stonemason. The reconstruction of Stormwind was an arduous task, but with such a genius as Van Cleef masterminding the operation, the guild had worked tirelessly to reconstruct the city, including the shining halls of Stormwind Keep. When at last the city stood whole and restored, the Stonemasons Guild gathered to collect their payment, as is tradition when one provides goods or services. However, the House of Nobles, a political assembly that forms part of the government of the Kingdom of Stormwind, under the direction of the kingdom's ruling dynasty, the House of Ryn, refused to pay the Stonemasons Guild for their work. The main reason behind the council pulling the move where you pull your pockets out of your pants to indicate how broke you are, or being the precursor to doing the elephant, some of you crazier listeners might know what I mean there, was that the head of the House of Nobles was a woman named Katrana Prestor. That name may ring a bell to many of us, as it wasn't just a noble woman. I'm going to go full Obi-Wan voice right now. That's no noble woman. It's a space station. She was the Black Dragon Onyxia, the current broodmother of the Black Dragonflight. Immensely powerful and cruel dragons who revel in mortal suffering and who seek only to appease themselves. Disguised and placed in a position of power in order to keep the humans busy, Onyxia ran the House of Nobles, while her brother Nefarian took over Blackrock Mountain. Katrana/Onyxia was the one who actually made the deal with the Stonemasons Guild originally, and she deliberately led them to believe that they were going to be paid a handsome sum of money for their services. So the alarm bells weren't ringing for the stonemasons when the deal seemed a little bit too good to be true. Like when you see a PS4 on eBay for $100. The Council of Nobles, however, had no idea that this arrangement had been made. The money simply wasn't there to pay the workers. It had already been used to expand Stormwind's military presence and invest in the .com boom, which wound up not really working out for them. Some members of the Council of Nobles suggested that payment shouldn't have even been a consideration by the stonemasons, as the act of rebuilding the city should have always been considered an act of service to Stormwind, and such a noble act would be payment in and of itself. Yeah, thanks. The inflated sense of service to my country doesn't exactly get my wife off my back as to why the kids are eating ramen noodles for the 4th night in a row. Upon being told that despite their deal with Katrana/Onyxia there would be no payment, the stonemasons, understandably, hit the fucking roof. In order to quell this issue, the House of Nobles came to some of the more senior members of the stonemasons, including Van Cleef, and offered governmental jobs if they'd just be quiet and play along. However, Edwin Van Cleef was not willing to betray his workmen. He spat on the floor, the universal sign for fuck you and the horse you rode in on, tuh, tuh, and walked out of the halls he had helped to build, vowing that he'd make the city pay one way or another. Shortly afterward, at Van Cleef's urging, workers rioted in Stormwind City. Several people died, including now King of Stormwind, Varian Ryn's wife, Tiffin Ryn, but not before she'd given birth to golden-haired angel boy Anduin, the new Prince of Stormwind. This pushed King Varian into a deep depression, which again is standard practice when your wife is basically murdered. Whilst Van Cleef, along with other artisans, were cast out of the city gates. Incensed by their treatment at the hands of the Stormwind government, Van Cleef took his group of artisans sitting in the mud outside the gates of Stormwind and led them away from the city, forging a plan for revenge. I'm picturing full Yoda here, like, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, blah, blah, blah. The shocked and forlorn workers were rallied by engineer Edwin Van Cleef and became bandits known as the Defias Brotherhood, collecting their payment on travellers at the time. Marking themselves with a tattoo of a cog on their right hands, which most of them regretted doing as soon as they turned about 40, the bandits declared that the machine will not run smoothly if the parts go renegade to each waylaid traveller that they came across. Banditry and thievery quickly became a way of life for the exiles, banding together under Van Cleef's leadership. Over the years, the ranks of the Brotherhood were bolstered by the skilled, the desperate, and the outcast. And now, those marked with the cog tattoo signifying membership numbered in the hundreds. In Elwyn Forest and the area around Stormwind, the Brotherhood had mastered the art of the ambush, and despite protection by the Stormwind City Guard, few caravans made it through the woods unhindered. The Guard's inability and unwillingness to pursue the Brotherhood into Westfall, their base of operations, led the farmers and villagers of the area, in an attempt to stave off the Brotherhood's constant looting, formed the People's Militia, a primarily human volunteer military organisation based in Westfall, and focused on defeating the Defias Brotherhood, and were founded on the thought, Stormwind has abandoned Westfall. Van Cleef turned to more ruthless tactics through the area. Merchants who brought goods to Stormwind were robbed, farmsteads that provided Stormwind with food were razed or infested with harvest golems. As Van Cleef strangled Stormwind stone by stone, he used the money he stole to pay for bands of mercenaries. Some of his men were captured, but Van Cleef played even that to his advantage. Inside the stockade of Stormwind City, his men gathered a force for rebellion. Stormwind and its loyal townships found themselves under an unexpected siege, and thanks to the sinister machinations of others, the town's cries for help went unheard. Lacking any formal military training, the outcasts who formed the Defias Brotherhood might have been forcibly disbanded long ago, were it not for the skilled craftsmen and tinkers who made up its founding membership. These founders have worked together to give members of the Brotherhood access to an array of mechanical devices and weapons, ranging from climbing equipment and smoke bombs to automatic crossbows and wagon traps. Many considered the Defias Brotherhood just a band of bullies and brigands, but they underestimated its military capabilities. While the Brotherhood employed mercenaries to bolster its ranks, it trained and fielded its own forces, preparing for the day when it would act to disrupt all trade with Stormwind. The Brotherhood's force served two purposes. First, it was a highly mobile raiding force, capable of quickly attacking a caravan, seizing its most valuable goods, and destroying the remainder. Second, it was a more conventional attack force that can launch attacks on Alliance garrisons and forts. To achieve these purposes, a typical Defias unit emphasized mobility, stealth, and ambush tactics, and toughness. In securing their stranglehold on Westfall, the Defias Brotherhood eventually came into conflict with the goblins of the area, who became upset both by the Brotherhood's raids on the merchant trains that supplied their shops, and by the Brotherhood's refusal to sell their inventions at Goblin Merchant Outpost. After repeated attempts by the goblins at negotiation were met by increased attacks on their suppliers by the Brotherhood, the merchants hired a group of mercenaries to hunt the bandits. This hunt resulted in the only major battle fought by the Brotherhood and led to the capture of all goblins in Westfall by the renegade bandits. Chained together, they were marched south into the Deadmines and put under the command of Edward Van Cleef. Insert awkward slavery metaphor here. What has happened to them since is unknown. According to an in-game resource, there is a large underground tunnel from the Deadmines to Stormwind Keep, which was created by goblins, gnolls, and other races of the Defias Brotherhood. Within the Deadmines, Van Cleef hatched and worked on his most ambitious plan, the reconstruction of a huge war machine, an ogre juggernaut, large ships that were used in the Horde's navy from the First War. He enlisted the goblins to repair the ship, as it was their race that constructed the ships originally, and they were the only ones who could interpret the confusing IKEA-esque assembly instructions. Van Cleef plans to use the ship to disrupt trade with Stormwind, thus depriving Stormwind of the riches that the city wrongfully withheld from the Stonemasons Guild. Van Cleef wanted to turn the ship into a pirate ship. Yar! Eventually, Stormwind and the People's Militia could tolerate the threat of Van Cleef no more, and they enlisted the help of a group of ragtag adventurers, that's us guys, to infiltrate the Deadmines and assassinate Van Cleef, which we happily did in the name of loot and lols. And that's the story of the Deadmines. But what about the story of the other inhabitants of the area that we came across outside of Van Cleef? Well, the Deadmines were inhabited by the following beings: fire elementals, ghouls, goblins, humans, murlocs, ogres, parrots, rats, skeletons, and Tauren. Well, just one, Mr. Smite. Just outside of the instance, the players could come across the following rare mobs. The Brainwashed Noble was a rare human mob that spawned near the undead section of the caves outside the Deadmines instance. Because of his rank, he appears to be a member of the House of Nobles of Stormwind, who was brought under control of the Defias Brotherhood. He drops a variety of uncommon quality loot. There was also Foreman Thistlenettle. He was a named ghoul found in the caves leading to the Deadmines. During his life, Foreman Thistlenettle was in charge of the mine near Moonbrook, a member of the Explorers League and brother to Wilder Thistlenettle. Today, his undead corpse haunts the Deadmines, where he hopes to mine the souls of the living. The final rare mob found near the Deadmines was Marisa DuPage. She was a level 18 rare human mage that spawned in the caves again outside the Deadmines. Marisa DuPage was a Defias mage and a skilled transmuter. DuPage is the daughter of one of Van Cleef's most skilled lieutenants who was killed during the Stormwind City riot. Marisa, a golden-haired woman in her mid-20s, always had an affinity toward both magic and cruelty, and the Defias Brotherhood gives her opportunities to indulge in both. She oversees operations in the upper levels of the Deadmines and the training of magical adepts. Now, inside the actual Deadmines instance, it could be broken down into 4 separate areas. 1. The Defias Hideout. 2. The Master Room. 3. Goblin Foundry. And 4. Ironclad Cove. The following bosses were encountered within those areas. Within the Defias Hideout, players would find Raxor, a level 19 elite ogre. Raxor is the foreman in charge of Edwin Van Cleef's construction projects. As in Warcraft 1, the Deadmines were invaded by ogres and were slaughtered by Black Hand's army. Raxor could be a survivor of the massacre perpetrated by the orcs in order to punish them for plotting with Griselda. However, this event happened during the First War, and Raxor belonging to this band of ogres is pure speculation. Next, the players could find a rare boss, Miner Johnson, a level 19 elite found again inside the Deadmines. His loot is sought after by twink characters with items such as the gold-plated buckler and the miner's cape. In the Master Room, players would find Sneed, a level 20 elite goblin. Sneed is Edwin Van Cleef's lumbermaster and pilots Sneed's Shredder. Sneed's Shredder is a level 20 mechanical elite. A giant lumber mill on legs. Sitting on top of the shredder is Sneed, who tries to chop everyone into planks of wood. In the Goblin Foundry, we found Gilnid, a level 20 elite goblin. Gilnid is the head smelter for Edwin Van Cleef. In the crafting of technological automatons, Gilnid may have no equal. Amoral beyond the ability of the goblins to stomach, Gilnid was cast out of Booty Bay when his insane experiments ran amok in the city's marketplace. Gilnid has no interest in politics and plays no part in the Brotherhood's decision-making, but the Brotherhood funds his experiments and keeps him supplied with parts. Van Cleef has enormous, perhaps too much, respect for Gilnid's mad talents. In the Ironclad Cove, players came across Mr. Smite, a level 20 elite Tauren. Mr. Smite is the first mate under Captain Greenskin. Due to his dark colouring and personality, it has been suggested that he may be a Grim Toten like Hapana, another Grim Toten who turned to piracy. Players also came across Cookie, a level 20 elite Murloc, who was also in the service of Captain Greenskin and Edwin Van Cleef. He is a Murloc and the only optional boss in the Deadmines. Beware, if Cookie is left with little health, he will run away and may pull additional enemies. How he became a cook in Van Cleef and Greenskin's service is unknown. Captain Greenskin is a level 20 elite goblin. Captain Greenskin is a goblin captain in the employ of Edwin Van Cleef. His first mate is Mr. Smite, and the cook aboard his ship is Cookie, who we just heard about. Captain Greenskin is accompanied by 2 guards. Edwin Van Cleef is a level 20 elite human boss, and I think we covered who Edwin is, so that's all there. Some sexy items that you could get inside of the Deadmines included the blackened Defias armor, the blackened Defias belt, and the gold-flecked gloves, amongst others. The Deadmines were particularly popular amongst players when they wanted to farm twink items for level 19 players to use in battlegrounds. And that's the lore of the Deadmines, everyone, and that's why we were there, who was inside, and what our objective was. And with all that being said, now it's time for the next segment, That's What We Said. Each week we cover what the community are talking about in relation to the content that was just covered. So in relation to what's coming with World of Warcraft Classic, what are players saying about the Deadmines and what are the hot button issues? I've brought you a few posts from the forums, and the first one I want to talk about was a post that was titled Tune-Up Bosses? This was put up on the official WoW Classic forums by a user called Pepito, and Pepito poses the following. So from what I've heard from people who play on private servers, bosses will need to be buffed pretty substantially to be even remotely difficult. On the servers where bosses were kept at their original health and damage numbers, pug groups were one-shotting every boss in the early raids, and most guilds were clearing knacks even within 1 to 2 weeks of it being opened. I kind of want to hear others' opinions on this. I personally feel that all the raids in Classic should be getting a substantial buff. Now, the reason I brought up this post is I know the word raids is used a few times there, but some people also have raised this argument in relation to dungeons. How do we feel as a community about the difficulty of all of the dungeons and all of the raids in World of Warcraft Classic being altered? Are you for it or are you against it? Obviously, I touched on the last episode on how people feel or how they're saying that they feel online in the forums about the tuning of the content being changed. Now that we know everything so well, now that we're all so much better at the game, do we need to have the bar raised in order to stop us from yawning while we're basically tearing through this content? I'll bring you a few posts in relation to this issue. The first one I've got is from a user called RonGent, who says the following: hardcore raiders were always just a small minority of the player base. Tuning a game for that small amount of people would not be a smart business decision. There are games that are harder. Those who wish for more challenges can play those, but let's keep vanilla. So obviously what he's saying is, hey, it's a very, very small percentage of people that we're talking about here who are just absolute guns at the game. And I touched on this in our last episode, guys, so if you want to hear a more elaborate conversation about that, please do go back and listen to that episode. But there's still the point that's sitting there in that, look, let's maybe leave it alone. Let the good guys be good and just rip through it. The majority of us are probably mediocre to poor players, or perhaps just above average, who knows. The next reply I want to bring you is from a user called Foxwedge, who says the following: I don't see why anyone would have a problem with retuning raids or dungeons. The idea of vanilla is that it was a game design philosophy, and as long as you adhere to that philosophy, there shouldn't be a problem. The people being selected to work on this project are also being judged on their passion for vanilla. In my eyes, retuning raids or dungeons is a must. Otherwise, we might as well call it WoW, speedrun. The most successful path this project can take involves retuning under the guidelines of vanilla game philosophy. Tweak boss health, damage, mechanics, as long as it is a vanilla experience. This will be so much better than just crushing raids and dungeons as they come out. Another great idea would be to jumble up the loot in the game. Make different pieces drop from different bosses for both raids and dungeons. You keep the same loot, but now you need to find out who drops what all over again. This would be so great, again, removing the speedrun element. A few interesting points there brought up by that user, Foxwedge. Now, how do people feel about not necessarily a change in content, but a change in loot tables? If we now swapped and mixed and matched and said, hey, it's all the same loot, but now this guy drops that and that guy drops this when they didn't before. I'm not sure. I mean, it's obviously just kind of everyone's winding up at the same end, but I mean, I could see it bringing a fresh look and approach to the dungeons, I guess. But the other question is there in that what Foxwedge is basically saying is that we must retune the raids and dungeons. It's imperative that we do because it still actually sticks to the game design philosophy of the original game. We're not cheating on the old concept of vanilla WoW if we just make things more difficult. We haven't changed the game. We've just perhaps ask people to put in a bit more effort or take a little bit longer to down a certain boss. Now, I do see where Foxwedge is coming from. We want to keep things fresh. We don't want to get bored with this content. We want an extra challenge. How do you guys feel about all that? I'm sort of on the fence in terms of retuning dungeons and raids, in terms of changing the actual difficulty and nothing else. I could take it or leave it, so I'd love to hear what you think. The next Deadmines sort of related topic that I want to bring you from the forums is a post titled Non-Beneficial Hard Mode, and this was posted by a user named Hatchmark, who says the following: trying to give the developers a bone here while keeping super hardcore purists happy, or at least trying to. But if the developers introduced a toggled hard mode for raids or dungeons, which worked like this: 1. You could freely switch between hard mode and regular mode between bosses. 2. You received no additional loot or better loot from doing a hard mode. 3. You received no vanity title or anything from achieving hard mode success. And 4. The only thing you receive is the joy of doing it. Would you be okay with that? That's a really interesting question. If there was just a switch that we could flick that just made the raid or dungeon more difficult and provided no additional benefits whatsoever, would you be down with that? Now, the first response I give you is from a user called Thygor, who says the following. I hate to break it to you, bro, but no changes. Seriously, this was first implemented in Wrath of the Lich King and it went all downhill from there. Pretty soon you found yourself in 4 difficulty modes, 1 mode for every brother and sister who wants to see endgame. One of the best aspects of Vanilla and Burning Crusade raiding was once you killed a boss, you killed the boss as it was intended. The satisfaction from killing any boss in Vanilla and Burning Crusade was glorious. I can't even express what it means to kill a boss without having to repeat it on Heroic, Mythic, Normal, or LFR. 1 difficulty to rule them all. You either can or you can't. And if you can't, you keep trying until you can. And once you can, you will be more satisfied than getting any best in slot gear you can obtain at that point. That's a pretty spirited reply there. And I do appreciate what Thygor is trying to say in terms of, look, we've been down this road before. If we're now talking about these kind of little changes, Blizzard's already tried this. We've tinkered with the hard modes, the mythic modes and all that jazz. Why would we go back and do WoW Classic and bring changes like this that people have rallied against in the past? We're making WoW Classic for the people who populate these private servers who kind of do lean towards no changes. So why would we go so risky with bringing a change like this that maybe doesn't deviate it that much from what's already available in retail? Now, there's always 2 sides of the coin, guys, and this is just one that I'm sort of presenting on behalf of this user. But I do like the energy behind their response where they're saying, look, it's either put up or shut up. There is 1 difficulty level. If you can't do it, TS. Get on board, train up, learn how to take it down, and push for that goal. But also in saying that, if it's too easy, deal with it. That's how it's going to be. We're not going to start mixing things up just to satisfy the better players, 1 difficulty to rule them all. A very interesting point. But the next reply was from a user named VXLK, who says the following. I'd much prefer the idea of keeping track of the best times on raids, much like challenge modes in Mist of Pandaria, ? People were clearing Molten Claw on Nostalrius in like 23 minutes. It'd be a fun, harmless way to keep the community involved with the top guilds and give extra content or skill cap. No in-game rewards, but maybe post the week's best time on the Classic forum for each raid with a link to the in-game guild, server, or members. This brings up a little bit of a prickly point for some people in terms of these kind of challenge modes, speed runs, timed efforts, and skill-based approaches through raids and dungeons. Now, obviously, we're all used to back in the day, hearing the news of World First and things like that. And I remember tracking myself, getting the news of all these guilds like, whoa, they took it down. Finally, it's happened. Oh my God, it gives me hope, even though I'm not going to come within fucking shouting distance of any of these raids. But it was really interesting to see people take down these challenges. But things kind of evolved to a point of, as they alluded to, speed running. And I know there's been a lot of backlash to this speed running vibe to World of Warcraft lately in terms of people posting to YouTube timed runs and stuff and all these challenges. And even though it's something that's become really, really popular in gaming over the last few years, people love their speed runs, count me one of them. For some reason, that love hasn't applied to World of Warcraft, and people feel that it's kind of defecting from the purpose of why we're in the game in the first place. It's there to get immersed in the environment, take your time, have some fun. And yeah, it does really rub people the wrong way. But how would you feel about this particular suggestion of like having that speed run element that you could flick on and then post your scores to a place online? I think it'd be interesting to hear your opinions, but I think people might be generally against that. I'm not 100% sure. The next reply I've got from is a user named Myrna3, who says this. Aren't you basically asking for Mythic? Sure, You're saying it's purely for bragging rights, but it's still polarizing. Can you imagine the forum wars? You noobs can't even clear Molten Core on hard mode and getting your welfare epics from Nax 40? Get the fuck out, scrubs. Nah, let's not do that. Let's keep it to good old-fashioned classic arguments about raid or die, tanks being poached, respec tax, the endless farming, essential trade skills hidden behind insane rep grinds, literal grinds, and why trade skills are crap compared to tier 2 anyway. Another very spirited response, and I do sort of enjoy that person saying, look, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Everyone jumping up and down, going, give us different difficulty levels. We want options. He's saying a few of you who are calling for that may not be as amazing at this game as you apparently think you are. Settle the fuck down, slow your roll, and just take down the stuff as it is, because they're betting that you probably haven't even cleared Molten Core yet. So just chill out. Interesting point to come from. And look, maybe it's true. I know I'm not jumping online and asking for these difficulty modes because, like I said, I'm shit and I can't even take any of this stuff down at normal difficulty. So I'll be quiet and take what Blizz gives me. The final post on this topic that I wanted to run through is from a user named Brianna, who says the following. This right here would fully and completely ruin the experience for me. One of the things I absolutely hate about the live game is speed runs in dungeons and raids. I truly hate it with a passion. One of the main reasons I've been so excited to go back to Classic is to be able to experience the dungeons and raids as they were back then. If they make dungeons and raids like they are in live, I have zero interest in playing Classic. Dungeons and raiding used to be one of my favorite aspects of this game, and they already have ruined it in live for me. I would hate to see them bring this horrible concept to the Classic servers. Very good point, and I've pretty much already touched on that. It's a nice one to wrap up with. That's kind of the vitriol that's coming from a certain percentage of the players on the forums in terms of this speed running or higher difficulty notion. I think what Brianna is effectively saying in no uncertain terms is, it wasn't broke back then, so don't fix it. We loved it for a reason back then. Don't taint WoW Classic with the concepts that you developed in retail that caused the backlash amongst the community and had you losing subscribers. How foolish would Blizzard need to be in order to bring some of these aspects to a game that they're developing for players that they lost because of the changes that they made? It flies in the face of logic. And I hope I've summarized well what I think Brianna is saying there. The final topic I want to bring up in relation to older content and the Deadmines and things like that, this more does relate to the Deadmines, and the topic is titled as follows. The post is titled as follows. Run-throughs will be a thing again. And this is a post from a user called Aliyaha who says this. This was in the Burning Crusade, but I don't care. I used to get asked to run lobies through dungeons quite a bit, and I ended up loving doing the single stairs pull in Zul'Farrak and the single pull of Scarlet Monastery Cathedral. This is something I hope to revisit if Blizz continue with other expansions. Pallies and the block heal trinket were fun. The mana issues while doing it were not. Now, the reason I brought up this post is obviously we're going to get in a situation where you'll have high-level players running through lower-level players in certain instances. And the old, hey, I've got a 60 mate who will run us through the Deadmines. We'll be fine. He'll take care of everything. We actually don't even really have to do anything. Just collect the loot as he trawls through the place. And that was part and parcel of the game. I have no real particular issue with run-throughs. I'd love to hear whether you guys do, if you were anti them or for them. Did you feel like you were sort of cheating the system by obtaining loot by having a friend run you through things and putting in no effort on your own part? Or did you feel like, hey, it's part of the game mechanic, there is a community aspect to this whole thing. If one of my friends happens to be a higher level than me, it's not my fault that they want to help me out. It's just an interesting concept, and I don't think Blizzard ever really had many issues with it themselves. But the replies that I want to bring you to, the first one is from a user called Tadkins, who says the following. I'm mixed on this, mainly because later on in the game, getting run through was all anyone ever did. If you didn't have any high-level friends to run you through dungeons you needed, you were shit out of luck, because fewer and fewer people were gathering together in legitimate groups and running them at the proper level. One of the reasons I like the LFD tool is it made low-level dungeons relevant again. Very, very interesting little point there, and a dirty word to some people, but not to all of us, is the LFD concept. Now, yes, it is true that with the automation of looking for group, looking for raid, looking for dungeon, whatever you may have, it obviously pieced together people of the same level groups, put everyone in pigeonholes about you're this role, just run through this content and do what you can do. Now, that did obviously remove the concept of higher level players tagging along, I think. Guys, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure how that worked with higher level players. But what this person is saying is they were anti the concept of these run-throughs because it killed the community in a way in that all people wound up doing was just sticking with their buds who were higher level, instead of sitting in town, calling out on the chat for a proper group that they could properly go through the challenge with because they were of the proper level. But it's an interesting argument there that that user raises. But that's the end of That's What We Said for this week. And with that, it's time for the segment that everybody's writing to me about, anger management. Each week I come to you with some of the angriest posts that I've found on the forums in relation to the content that we've just discussed. So the first post I bring you is one from a user named Mr. Brope, who says the following about the Deadmines. Yes, sometimes it's frustrating finding a group for Deadmines, and it's even more frustrating to have to walk the entire way from Sentinel Hill through the mobs in Moonbrook and into the mines filled with mobs just to get to the dungeon where you will inevitably wipe. But that is what we want. Nice little ending there. The next one comes from a user named BaileyXX, who says this. I used to do the Deadmines over and over and over again when I was a middle schooler during Vanilla WoW until I lost patience, made a new character, and then did it over and over and over again. The next submission comes from a user named Falcion, who says this. After Dire Maul came out, a lot of servers adapted and changed the nomenclature to DM for Dire Maul and VC for Deadmines/Van Cleef Boss. Lots of people from way back like to advocate that DM was and should always have been Deadmines, while Dire Maul always had a modifier, that being Dire Maul East or DM East. But this wasn't the case on quite a few servers. I was on 4 different servers from Vanilla into BC, and after Dire Maul, people who used VC were always understood, while people who called for DM got questions like, why do you want Dire Maul when you're 18, bro? The next submission comes from a user named Creedom, but I have to read you what they were replying to first, and the message they were replying to goes as follows. Deadmines is one word. It's not dead space mines. So DM is and was, prior to Dire Maul, a bad abbreviation anyway. Now the killer response is this one from Creedom. Well, if they were looking for D, then they'd get much different attention than they'd be seeking. The final submission comes from a user called Volley, who says the following. This is by far the worst instance in the game. I will not pug this instance, and this last week I feel the RNG has changed to favour Deadmines because of a recent hotfix. Deadmines is far too long, unless you're in a geared guild group that runs together often. Furthermore, it takes almost an hour and a half with a bad tank. What was Blizz thinking? I have enough time sinks in this game already. Fix Deadmines for fuck's sake, and remove the random trash or multitude of crap bosses. I think a lot of us like the Deadmines. I can't believe that, but that's what I found. And with that, now it's time for Tidbits. Each Wednesday I come to you with a few tidbits or little morsels of information that you might not have known or possibly did know. So, with regards to the Deadmines, did you know the Juggernaut and the area within which it is contained is more than likely a reference to the 1985 film The Goonies, namely One-Eyed Willie's ship, the Inferno, which sat in the grotto that the children came across eventually. Next, did you know that, as alluded to earlier in anger management, the abbreviation for the Deadmines was actually generally VC, to avoid confusion with another instanced Dire Maul, which generally got DM. When in doubt, however, about which DM was being used, because players sometimes did confuse them and use both, you would often just check the level of a person asking for a group. A lower level character is obviously more likely referring to the Deadmines, and the higher level character is obviously referring to Dire Maul. Next, did you know that if you travel to a small cove north of Yojamba Isle in northwestern Stranglethorn Vale, you can see a large water gate which leads to the docks inside the Deadmines? However, you cannot enter or leave through this. Interestingly, inside the Deadmines, this gate exists to the north, but outside of it, the gates exist to the south. And apparently this isn't the only instance of maps or compasses being a bit mixed up once you get inside an instance as opposed to what they're like outside the instance. Either way. Did you know that a short film titled Welcome to the Deadmines was the winning entry for the World of Warcraft movie contest Rise to Power in 2010? It was essentially a music video dedicated to the Deadmines and the upgrade it received in Cataclysm. It features all the old bosses of the Deadmines as they sing a musical number. When this was done, the makers may not have known that the Deadmines bosses were being removed, or they did and decided to go along with it anyway. Either way, it's still placed first, and you can find that video on YouTube, guys. And finally, as many of you may have known, the Deadmines went through a rather drastic overhaul for the Cataclysm expansion in terms of Vanessa Van Cleef, Edwin Van Cleef's daughter, being put in charge of the location. Basically, we now got a scene in which Vanessa Van Cleef saw her father get beheaded by us and rose to power within the Defias Brotherhood and took over from her father. And we then go on to fight her, basically. And now it's time for Top 5. Each Wednesday I come to you with a little bit of creative fun, creating a top 5 listing of my own making about the subject matter that we've just covered. And this week I bring to you the top 5 one-liners that the adventurers tried after beheading Van Cleef. Now guys, what I want you to picture is full Arnold voice from the 80s and doing those really schlocky one-liners that we used to get from action movies back then. Think of like the Running Man and Predator and stuff like that, where he'd be like, knock, knock, and then kill everyone. Or in Running Man, he goes, need a lift, just before he picked someone up and threw them over the edge of a high fall. So bear with me while we go through these ones. Coming in at number 5, so just keep in mind, we've just beheaded Edwin Van Cleef and we're sitting there holding the bloody dripping head and sort of all 5 of us looking at each other trying out these one-liners. So, number 5. Turns out he was ahead of his time. Come on guys, give me a pity chuckle, please. Number 4. You should see a doctor about that bad case of VC. Number 3. He had a great head on his shoulders. Number 2. Talk about an out-of-body experience. And number 1. Heads up. Come on, guys, give me a break. I'm out on a limb here. Anyway, that's been Way Back Wednesdays for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Countdown to Classic about the Deadmines. And guys, just a reminder that what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be coming to you every Wednesday with a deep dive on the lore and content of Vanilla WoW. And you might have heard me mention at the top of the show that the show will now be coming out on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I do thank a Reddit user by the name of Asmo, who is one of the many of you who's been in touch with me in the last week, guys, who gave me the really great tip that I've absolutely taken on board that I should have thought of earlier to actually release on Mondays instead of Sundays, as so many more of you will be looking for something to do on a Monday morning, perhaps with cubiculitis, as opposed to a Sunday. So that's obviously a great suggestion. So now every week, Countdown to Classic is coming to you Mondays and Wednesdays. And I try to get them to you by the morning Eastern Standard Time. So generally you should see them up by sometime between sort of 10 and 12 on Mondays and Wednesdays. And that's obviously, when I say Eastern Standard Time, I mean America, not Australia. So guys, with that, I just want to say one last thank you again, a big thank you to all of you. This podcast has been going bananas download-wise, and I just want to thank you, the listener, again, for listening to this podcast. It's your input that has been driving me forward and will continue to make this podcast grow. We've had over 1,000 downloads in our first week of operation, which is absolutely insane, guys, and I thank you so much, and I can't tell you how many messages I've gotten from so many of you just saying, great work, we love it, please keep going. And I absolutely will. So thank you so much. Please don't be shy in saying hello. I listen to so many podcasts. I remember for years I never wrote to the hosts or anything when I wanted to. Guys, I'm inviting you to get in touch if you just want to say hey or anything like that, or if you've got a suggestion for the show, or if you've got a submission for anger management, or if you've got a submission for memory lane, or any of this stuff, if you want to hear about a certain topic, please do get in touch with me. But anyway, guys, I'll be back with you on Monday, and the first topic I'm going to be leading off with on Monday is the shocking news that came on the forums today, the subreddit, of Tip basically temporarily retiring, which was really, really sad to hear, and we'll be going into a bit of depth about that and content creation in regards to Warcraft on Monday. So I'll see you then, guys, and thanks again for listening.